and yet to feel like crying.
The great procession took 2 days. General George Armstrong Custer stole the show the first day, galloping past the dignitaries far ahead of his men, brandishing his saber, his long yellow hair whipping in the wind. But the crowds cheered loudest the next morning as William Tecumseh Sherman rode past at the head of the great army he had led to the sea. By May, most of the Yankees had withdrawn from Clarksville, Tennessee. What remained of the 49th and 14th Tennessee regiments came home. Private John J. Denny of Company K was not among them. He had died at Chancellorsville. Of the 29 Stuart College seniors who went to war, 16 had been killed in battle. 7 more had died of wounds and disease. In September, railway service to Clarksville was resumed. Deer Isle, Maine was an indirect casualty of the war. When its men came home, they found fishing had fallen off. There was new money to be made in other industries in nearby towns. The old families moved away. Some of the houses they left behind became summer homes for vacationers, most of whom were unaware of what had happened there. John Wilkes Booth's accomplices were swiftly tried before a military commission. All 8 were found guilty. 4 were sentenced to be hanged, including Mary Surratt, whose only crime may have been that she owned the boarding house in which the conspirators met. The executions took place in the courtyard of the old penitentiary building on July 7th. Prisoners climbed the 13 steps and sat in chairs while the charges were read aloud. 2 priests comforted Mrs. Surratt and shielded her from the sun. White hoods were slipped over their heads. General Winfield Scott Hancock, the hero of Gettysburg, clapped his hands 3 times, and soldiers knocked the front part of the platform out from under the condemned. It took them more than 5 minutes to die. A northern newspaper said, "We want to know their names no more."
Somewhere they crawled to die, alone, in bushes, low gullies, or on the sides of hills. There in secluded spots, their skeletons, bleached bones, tufts of hair, buttons, fragments of clothing, are occasionally found yet. Our young men, once so handsome and so joyous, taken from us, the son from the mother, the husband from the wife, the dear friend from the dear friend. Walt Whitman.
$3.5 million men went to war. 620,000 men died in it, as many as in all the rest of America's wars combined. 1/4 of the South's white men of military age were dead. In Iowa, half the men eligible to fight served in the Union Army, filling 46 regiments in all. 13,001 Iowans died, 3,540 in battle, 515 while prisoners of war, and 8,498 of disease. Those figures were typical. The 5th New Hampshire Regiment started out from Concord in 1861 with 1,200 men. When they returned to New Hampshire after Gettysburg, there were only 380 left. In Mississippi in 1866, 1/5 of the state's entire budget was spent on artificial limbs. Millions were left with vivid memories of men who should have still been living, but were not. The survivors went home and got on with the business of living.
The morning after my arrival home, I doffed my uniform of first lieutenant, put on some of my father's old clothes, and proceeded to wage war on the standing corn. The feeling I had was sort of queer. It almost seemed sometimes as if I had been away only a day or two, and had just taken up the farm work where I had left off. Leander Stillwell, formerly 61st Illinois.
The boys who had gone off to war were old men now. They walked over the old battlefields with their families, pointing out the places where they had once done things that now seemed impossible, even to them.
They had a theoretical notion of having a country, but when the war was over, on both sides, they knew they'd had a country. They'd been there. They had walked its hills and tramped its roads. They saw the country, and they knew they had a country, and they knew the effort that they had expended and their dead friends had expended to preserve it. It did that. It made their country an actuality.
By the turn of the century, monuments and memorials and statues stood in city parks and courthouse squares from Maine to Mississippi.
Number 220, Statue of American Soldier, price $450. When used as a family monument and photos of the deceased soldier can be furnished, we will model a new head in a true likeness. The extra cost will be but $150. The Monumental Bronze Company, Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Halls Hill, Virginia, July 4, 1865. Another Independence Day in the Army, and this has been my 5th. The first we passed at Camp Clark near Washington, the second at Harrison's Landing, the third at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the fourth at Petersburg. And today, we are back in Washington with our work finished. The day has been fun. Elisha Hunt Rhodes.
The war made Elisha Hunt Rhodes. Having risen from private to colonel during the war, he was promoted to brigadier general after it, then went into the cotton and wool business in Providence. He devoted nearly every idle hour to Veterans Affairs and never missed a regimental reunion.
America has no north, no south, no east, no west. The sun rises over the hills and sets over the mountains. The compass just points up and down. And we can laugh now at the absurd notion of there being a north and a south. We are one and undivided. Sam Watkins.
Sam Watkins returned to Columbia, Tennessee, ran the family farm, and in the evenings worked on his memoirs, Company H. Despite, he said, a house full of young rebels clustering around